Oh, yeah, we already got all sorts of attendees in early. Doesn't surprise me at all. Can you guys hear me? Let me turn down my fans. Turn down the AC Infinity fans. We got Rob Smith in the chat, but Rob Smith is not appearing on the panel for some reason.
Hello, hello.
There you go. We got your audio and we got your video. But I don't know why you're not up here with me, next to me. I feel weird all alone at the top here. Oh, it's swapping. Okay, that's why. Okay, that makes sense. Cool. Welcome, everybody.
I see you.
Yep. Welcome all. Let me make sure that the chat's queued up.
There we go.
Fireside with
Looking
Frenchie.
good.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay, Rob?
I can hear you. Jeremy
Awesome.
says audio is good.
Love it. We're set up here. We're in the studio with King Slug. We're getting ready for the Fireside with Frenchie. Should be joining any moment. So exciting. What's cracking, Rob? What are you snacking on?
Little leftovers from my birthday dinner last night.
Nice.
I got
Rob Smith.
a chicken parm bite garlic bread sandwich.
Damn. God damn.
Yeah.
It sounds delicious.
Yeah, dude.
Oh, man, this is disastrous. I had a lighter.
Frenchie 2, I can see you.
Uh-oh.
Is
Now, he must have hit the Frenchie 2 must have hit the webinar join link. You need to make sure to use the link in the email that I sent. Zoom sent out an email from my address. So that's the one you need to join to be a panelist and get video and all that. I think that we can probably allow them. Yeah,
probably.
Promote to panelist. Yeah, we can.
There you go.
Should we just go ahead and do that?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go.
Get easy.
Okay, bam. Now you should be able to activate your mic and your video from your end.
Is there a Frenchie 1?
There is a Frenchie 1. And that's the thing. Frenchie 2 is, oh, there we go.
There
There's
we
the man
go.
himself. What's up, Frenchie?
Outside the fire in California.
Oh, man.
It's
Jeez.
hard to think of anything else now for the moment. It's pretty stressful.
Oh, my gosh. Where are you in California?
In the Bay Area, but yesterday was, today you don't see the sun at all, not even a ball. Yesterday it was like red, not really red here, orange, like a weird orange. And the further north you go, the redder it became until you reach the gate of hell, really, literally, like where all my farmers are.
That's what I saw on Instagram is like a red sky over San Francisco. And wow, man.
Yeah, pretty stressful. I think yesterday was the most stressful day in my life.
Jeez, man. We hope that you stay safe out there. And we appreciate you.
Yeah, we're safe. Except for ash falling down, it's like we're 3 hours drive from the main one. It's I have all my friends, all my farmers up there. A lot of them evacuating. It's hell up there. Hell.
Jeez, man. That's really, really wild. Me and Rob were just talking about that today and how we can maybe help or give back in some way to this cause, because it's really devastating that whole part of the country, and then of course the industry that we care about so much.
Yeah, not a very bad time already. The game is playing that they will disappear, that they want it or not. You know what I mean? There is nothing to help them survive. And then you've got something like this on top of it. It's like, even if you don't burn, your crop is not good anymore.
It's like terrible, man. Terrible.
Who knows how long we're not going to see the sun at all. It's insane. It's like, and every year we beat record of how much we burn. It's insane totally.
Everyone's wishing the West Coast love, saying that they're hoping you're safe, Frenchie. So thank you to everyone in chat.
Thanks to all, yeah.
And thank you, Frenchie, for joining us amidst all this craziness, man. We appreciate you. And
yeah, it helps. I mean, like this, you're gonna ask me question. I'm gonna start thinking of something else. Actually, I'm thankful.
good. Okay. Love it. Some distraction, some well-needed distraction. So
Yeah.
listen, let's fire it up officially here for the replay. Here we are, the fireside with Frenchie, the hash making master himself, the world traveler. For those of you on the list, you've received emails with all of Frenchie's videos already, so you're already all caught up. For those who are watching the replay, I urge you to subscribe to Frenchie Cannoli on YouTube and go to FrenchieCannoli.com to see everything he's doing and watch those incredible hash tutorial videos. I really enjoyed going through all of those. And today here on this stream, we're just going to allow Frenchie to regale us with stories from his travels, some of his most memorable hashish experiences, and all that sort of thing. And we're also going to do a quick Q&A session. So you panelists, you audience members, you attendees can get your questions answered by the man himself. So Frenchie, I'd love to hear some stories, man, wherever you want to begin. I'm a big world traveler myself, so anything involving travel, I'd love to hear. Maybe your most memorable consumption experiences, or I don't know, run-ins with the laws, or anywhere you want to go. Let's just start wherever you want to go.
Well, one of my very most memorable time was the first time I smoked, actually. It was a life-changing experience at a time where I really needed to see the light. Like I was 17 years old. When I was a kid, all my dreams were traveling. All my heroes were crazy adventurers and stuff. So I had dream of traveling, of being like my little friend Gypsy that I spent time when I was a kid and stuff. But puberty and then adolescence, there is sex, you forget your dream, your kid stuff. And then 17 years old, you face life. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And it's like, whoa, this is like a 40, 50-year sentence of what you're going to be, what you're going to do.
The reality of adulthood, right.
It flipped me out because I didn't fit at all, but at all. And smoking that first joint of Lebanese, first, it brought me into a space I had not been that full of joy of life since I was a kid. You know, when you're a kid, you just run for the joy of running and you do shit because life is so fucking great.
Right.
And at 17, dude, I had totally forgotten that life could be like that. And then at the same time, he brought all the smell and taste of the hash was like the 1001 Night, Henri de Montfred and the Red Sea, like Kipling, and it brought the travel back into my mind. And the only thing that I really still wanted to do was to travel. And that's what I did for 18 years solid.
That's so incredible, man. I think that your worldliness and your gratitude shines through. Really, it does. I think you've kept that, like, just the way you're smiling right now, for instance. But, like, do you feel that cannabis aids in that kind of breaking down of the ego and kind of reestablishing yourself as, a member of this planet, not the center of the universe?
It's like, I didn't know it was a medicine until I was in my mid-40s when I came to the States. So, but when I realized that it was actually a medicine, I could see with the time what I did with it. And I had a fucked up, loving childhood where in my time they beat the shit out of you to teach you something.
Right.
May it be in school or at home, to teach a kid to behave, you beat the shit out of him. My oldest memory is to kneel on a bloom with Bible in each
Right.
arm, okay?
Ugh.
And I was a rebel all my life. That was the wrong approach with me, but like big time. And so at 17, I just couldn't fit in that society. And I needed freedom, but like pure freedom, like
Wow.
nobody, no one, nothing could hold me anywhere if I decided to go anywhere at any time. And for 18 years, that's what I did. I didn't really have I had a destination, the point of arrival, but I never had a map. I didn't know where I was. I didn't care where I was. Everything was dedicated to travel. I didn't have a time limit. I didn't have nowhere specific to go. You know what I mean? I was just going. Anybody I met who was telling me, oh, why don't you come with me? Or did you see that? Or
Wow.
did you do that? Is that, oh, wow, that sounds really cool. And that's it.
Wow, man.
And
Actually,
that's what
yeah.
I did for 18 years solid.
That's incredible. Before we get to hashish specifically, when it comes to the travel itself, what cultures were most impactful to you, and like which parts of the world? And if you want to incorporate hash too, that's good. But which cultures left the biggest impression?
No, you'll see. It's really not a question of hash in this. It's Mexico, Japan, and India.
Oh, incredible!
With
India, that doesn't surprise
with
me.
no order to it, basically.
Amazing.
But that's the three countries that touch me the most, like at every level.
Oh, I love that. Those are three of my favorite countries right there. I love Japan. I'm obsessed with Japan. I watch Japanese sumo and all of that. But yeah, man, I just love world travel, and I think it expands your mind. Literally, the only thing that comes close to taking psychedelics and smoking marijuana and stuff like that is travel and education. Those are the things that expand your mind and expand you as a human being. So,
but traveling is education. I mean, it's like my education is mostly my travel. As much as I was deep into history, my first adventure book, truly like the one I was really crazy about it for a long time, was Iliad and Odyssey.
Mm.
You know what I mean? So it's like all those ancient culture have always fascinated me. That's why Mexico, the Maya and stuff was like, wow.
Oh, that's cool.
And it's like it's something to read in a book, and it's something else to be in the rooms and just feeling it. It's like there is still like the vibe of those people in some of those rooms. It's like some of them is really powerful. You don't need anything.
I love it, man. I absolutely love it. I want to talk about specifically, you mentioned a hashish experience that you had in the Himalayas. And I'd love to turn to that story and dive in a little deeper.
Those 18 years of travel, I would have given anything, even smoking, for traveling, because that was my ultimate drug, really. It became addictive to have so much newness around you when everything is foreign, from the smell to the sound to the taste of everything. Everything is foreign. Your awareness is like 101% full power always.
So true.
When you have that much input in your life, it's super addictive. It's like you cannot stay in the same place. I couldn't stay more than 3-4 months to do the same things every day, except making charas or making hash for 3-4 months in a year would drive me crazy. I needed to move on to be able to have like that.
It's incredible.
Foreignness around it. It's super addictive.
You were addicted to the culture shock. I love that, man. Did you make your way east? Like, did you have a pattern? Like, I know you wound up in India and stuff, but like...
No, I had no pattern. It was really weird. It's like after Mexico, and somebody has asked me lately when did I make my first hash? Well, it's actually in Mexico.
Oh.
I made hash in France. I started to press hash as soon as I started to smoke, because I needed to pay for my smoke. I never had really my family was okay, but I never had pocket money to do anything. And I was repressing like really fifth grade Moroccan hash and make it look like first grade red Lebanese.
Nice.
I could do marvel with the press and a little sticky liquid like cognac, whiskey, Coca-Cola, sugarcane. I could make sand look like bomb. And when I was doing that, it's a friend of my the brother of my best friend was a dealer, a Moroccan. And while I was working with him, he was telling me story about like the good 00 of Morocco and the white ash that they make for the king and like stories. And the little I learned from manipulating resin and pressing and making it look better, well, that was enough to, as a foundation to travel and make ash anywhere I wanted to go to Mexico. When you have like, we arrived in Mexico, we had the oil we made from Moroccan. It's like already you're foreigners, but you don't need their smoke. You got your own stuff that come from Morocco. When you're in the middle of nowhere in Mexico, the relation with the people is totally different. You're a real stoner with real stoner. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And from there, your relation changed. Where when I went to anywhere in a mountain in India, it's the same. It's like, are you the guy who's gonna make ash at 1,000 feet in a valley? Or are you the guy who's gonna spend 3 months in a cave at 10,000 feet?
Jeez.
Basically, I'm the type of dude that spends 3 months in a cave at 10,000 feet.
That's insane, man.
I waited for my best friend for 3 weeks in a valley with plants around me, people asking me, telling me to do it. I didn't touch a plant before I was exactly where I wanted, like at the end of a valley in the middle of nowhere, semi-white plants that were like, I just wanted to do it the first time in the most beautiful and with the most awesome plants. I was ready to wait to be able to do that. It's like, wow, it's a state of mind. It's like I was making my ash every year because I like to smoke quality, and the stuff I smoke, nobody sells it. They don't sell that type of your stash. You don't sell your stash. Now I can do it here in California, but in my time, I would have never thought that I would ever sell my stash.
That's incredible, man. It sounds like you are an artist waiting to be ready to create. I don't want to flatter you, but that's what you remind me of.
That's I made ash all my life, dude. All my friends made ash. It's not a big deal for me. The big deal is in India, anywhere I want in the world, it's not me making the ash that defines the quality. Where did I go to make the ash? Which valley, which hamlet, right. How high it fucking is. That's the quality. It's the land, the climate, and the genetic. This is the quality. Me, I'm just the dude that collect it. Okay? It's like
you got to give yourself a little more credit. I see what you're saying.
At best, I can consider myself a winemaker because I collect something, but there is transformation, and it's not the same product at the end. But that's what it is. And when I came here in California, well, my vision, my relation with the plant and what I did for 18 years solid, when I came here, it's the same. You want to have the best, you go deep into the producing region. Emerald Triangle.
Yeah, Humboldt County, baby.
So there you need to hook up with the farm. And in producing country, it's easy. You go and talk the talk and it happens. In the Emerald Triangle, it's a little bit more tricky. But at the end of the day, when you connect with the farm, you have the land, the climate, and the genetic still. But the genetic, it's somebody who breeded it. Okay?
Yeah.
So for years.
Right.
So there is credit to be given. And then there is actually a dude growing those plants that they don't fucking give them a name, but they know them all. It's pretty crazy, the dedication and the relation of the farmer and the plant in the Emerald Triangle. So for me, in my head, it was the same as usual, except that I had two new factors that made it very much like I'm a winemaker. I work with certain cultivars grown on certain vineyards. And that's my relation with the Emerald Triangle. Is like, it's not me making ash that make it really good. Yeah, I'm good at what I do. But if I don't have quality, I don't make great stuff. It's very simple. It's like I'm limited. I'm 101% dependent on my farmer to be able to deliver what everybody think I'm the ash god. I'm not the ash god. I work with the best genetic and the best farmer in the world, basically. It's
yeah, I think all parts are definitely important, but I see what you're saying, and it's really cool that you got to travel the world, and then found such an epicenter and a hub in Humboldt County, where I lived for 5 years, and it's a beautiful place on the cannabis side, but it's also just a beautiful place as far as travel. The redwood forests are in my top 3 places on the planet, personally. So I don't know, man. I love hearing stories like this. And I would love to ask you, specifically when it comes to, okay, I have a bunch of questions. Let me start first before we get off track. Forgive me because I'm not a hash making expert by any means. I don't even know that much about it. It sounds like climate, when it comes to altitude and humidity and all that stuff, is really, really important. Like you were saying that we weren't just talking about just the strains in India. You were talking about the physical location of making the hash, kind of like bread makers in San Francisco.
Yeah, okay. No, it's. I mean, in India, in the Himalaya, I was working with wild cannabis that has been growing in those mountains for over 30,000 years, solid. Okay, solid. So it's like. It's something else. There is a lot, but at the same time, I didn't bloody know that at the time. Right. So as much as I didn't know nothing about genetic, about nothing. I just knew how to collect resin gland. That I knew, but I didn't know nothing else about it. We didn't know cannabinoid. We had no idea whatsoever. But when you have plants that live at 10,000 feet for so long, the power of those plants, it's even if you don't know, you can feel to a level you cannot appreciate at the level you should, but you can definitely feel it. And the charas from there, it's insane. Wow. It's insane. It's like you have little patch growing in a forest, and you have to keep moving every day. It's rare when you have patches where you stay more than one day working.
And it's like, what was the cannabis like? Was it very wild looking? Like it's not like the...
So it can go, it all depends the cover. When you have like a true opening in the forest, doesn't matter how big, it's packed of narrow-leaf drug type. They're so close, there is no branching. They're 3-4 feeter, a long skinny bud with a few fan leaves, like super easy to rub. A lot of color, a lot of terpene profile. And then you have stuff that grow undercover. Like I had a patch of plants that grew maybe maximum a feet in undercover in a patch of wild strawberry. Man, the stuff every year that ash tasted like strawberry. I thought I was making it up when I was there because I didn't know.
Wow.
And now I learned that actually the plant picks up the terpene profile of its habitat if it make it stronger. We had another one, like they grow, depends if they grow under, there is some type of wild hazelnut, nutty type of plant. It pick up the terp of the place. It's trippy, it's wild. The wild, we call it jungle. And it packs the punch, the stuff is like,
Holy cow, I love it, man. Someone's got a question about smoking. The way he phrases it is, what miracle have you witnessed while hallucinating? But I would like to hear what stoned experiences stand out to you the most.
So outside my first time, there is the Chillum hookah of my Afghan buddy in India. I call it a hookah, they call it a Chillum. And it's a big water pipe with a hose, but it's like a solid bamboo type, like a big clay ball, a bunch of ash inside, a coal on top, and you have like to pump it so that the coal become red, and then pull like a maniac and create a huge flame. If you don't make the flame, you look like, it looks bad. It looks really bad. And nobody wants that. So when you light, man, I had never had a rush of cannabinoid like that. It's like, you know, when you're like,
Paralyzed?
and you pray that the stuff is not going to come back to you too very soon, because you don't know if you can pull a second time on that stuff. It's like, whoa.
And that was from an Afghan friend that you met in India.
In two Afghan friends that teach me a lot about Afghan hash and pressing and sieving and shit, that were refugees in India, in New Delhi, that we help, like doing the writing and stuff for them to apply for visa and stuff and they were dealing a bunch of stuff from stone, carpet, you name it, and a lot of ash. They knew their stuff. And
wow,
that was the first time that I really saw Afghan ash, like the stash of those two dudes. Whoa! I thought I had seen Afghan before.
I love it, man. Damn, Afghan hash out of a bong rip out of a hookah. That sounds great. We have another question. Someone's asking what the key differences are between brick hash, like Lebanese blonde, dry/can break, and a traditional temple ball style. Does that question make sense?
Yeah, totally. So the traditional temple ball are called Royal Nepalese temple ball. It's crazy. It's made in India. In India, you hand rub the plant, and once you have enough, you have a layer of resin thick enough for your hand, you unstick it. So you have a lot of little chunk of ash. You press that one by one into a big ball that is a good, like, I don't know, 50, 70 gram ball. And they make it like that. There is not a crack, it's like it's absolutely perfect.
No imperfections.
Once you create that, because there is no packaging, there were no plastic bag not so long ago. I mean, when I was in India, I could exchange plastic bag for ash. Okay, it was so rare. So in that time, they find a way to use the resin to protect the resin. They would roll that ball on some type of ceramic of glass plate until they fuse the resin outside into a shell that is like an eggshell, maybe a millimeter or two thick. Oh. And inside that eggshell, the resin is protected from anything. You could keep it in water, it wouldn't go in, I think.
Yeah. Interesting. And then,
And so that's a Royal Nepalese temple bowl, and it's made with hand rub. In Lebanon, they dry sieve. They dry sieve like old school, like you dry sieve flour. And they have a tech where they clean their trim by stage, by pile. And every pile becomes cleaner and cleaner and cleaner until that their last pile, where they use their smallest micron, and that's their last quality. And it's one of the few countries that can create quality, doesn't matter if they are in wartime or not, because of their tech. It's pretty badass. They do that also in northern Afghanistan, I've seen.
So that's more of like a keef, like a sieved keef?
It's dry sieve. And the stone is very different, like live resin, charas, it's super uplifting. You can smoke like a fucking chimney. Like, it speeds you up. Ash is more like, even if it doesn't lock you down, it's that vibe where it's like comfy, warm. You can do stuff, but it's not like there is no real like speedy energy to go with it. You know what I mean?
Interesting. Okay, I like it. So there's something that comes out in that long process that you do with the pressing and the rolling, and there's something else that comes out in that.
Man, you activate your cannabinoid a lot to start with. You know what I mean? It's like when you smoke, yeah, you decarb, but you decarb how much? 20%, 25%.
Right.
If I pre-decarb my hash 40% before that, well, you have 65, 70% of psychoactive cannabinoids that enter your blood system. Well, you feel the difference.
Hell yeah, man. I love that.
Imagine those people, the people, they have been doing that for millennium. There is not one country, one hash producing country that do not press their resin with the source of it. Everyone does it. And if they don't do it before, they do it just before smoking. Everywhere, always. Nobody smokes a loose resin. And if you ask them, it's because it makes strong hashish or good hashish or better smoke. So it's like one dude figured it out that you can literally activate cannabinoid in a resin in trichon gland that you can't even see.
Yeah, buddy. You've got me totally sold.
I mean, it's like the relation with the plant that you need to be able to get that out of it. Oh, wow. It's deep. It's really deep.
Yeah, man. Absolutely love it. Someone's asking which country makes the best hash. Not necessarily where you experienced it, but like overall, which culture do you feel is the most talented in making hash? Lebanon, if you had to generalize. Lebanon and Afghanistan?
Lebanon and Afghanistan.
Extrapolate on that.
Yeah, Afghanistan, but like all the country ex-Russia that are around even the Chinese part, the Tarim Basin, Yarkand, this country where in the 1800s they were known all over for the quality of their hash.
Wow. Wow.
And Lebanon, because they have one of the greatest technique, and they it's maybe where it actually started.
Right. Right. Yeah, that makes sense historically, especially because of, closer to Iran and all the horse traders, the Scythians, so many years ago.
More than that, it's like if you look at the evolution of humanity and the dispersal of the plant was in a fertile crescent, the richest soil in the world that gave birth to all agriculture, okay? The plant was there 4 million years before Homo erectus had foot there.
Right.
okay?
Yeah.
4 million years of dispersal in one of the best habitat ever. The history there goes so deep. It's like all the dispersal of all the genius Homo started there on the Levantine corridor, Lebanon, Israel. So it's like it's the pre-agriculture was there. Some dude were making bread and beer 9,000 years before the birth of agriculture.
Jeez.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Just from plants that have been favored by humanity. Every time you come to the same place, there is more of that very one. And that's what made agriculture. We did, it wasn't really conscious. It was coming back to a place and being, I think, husbanding what nature was offering you in a way that was prolific.
I love that. Shout out to Bosom, who posted the Botany of Desire, that documentary. I'm sure you've seen it, right? And
I read the book. I didn't see the movie. I read the book.
Right. It's based off of the book, and really, really worth a watch. Anybody who's watching this, kind of similar, kind of in the same vein of what you just said, and really, really cool.
When you go a little deeper, yeah.
For sure. So let's see. We have lots of questions in here. Someone's asking about hash making advice. We love your tutorials on YouTube. He says that all parts of your process are important, certainly, but what is the one part that will make the most difference in yield, one way or another, if done right or well?
You need to learn the science behind my tech. For this, you need to go to my website. You go to the article page. You go to the Weed World section. The 6 last articles are the written version of the workshop. And the first 3 are the science behind, something I didn't give in a video because I've never really been happy with it. And it's there you have the why I do everything I do. And that would really help you answer the question, because it's a deep question. It's like
sure.
The yield is very dependent on the condition the plant is harvested, but mostly on when the plant is harvested. There is a 3-day peak window. If you harvest early, there is not as much resin formed inside the trichome gland as if you harvest at the right time. If you harvest 2 weeks early, you will collect a lot of gland, but there will be no resin inside. You cannot press them. You can hardly get anything when you squish it with a rosin press. But you have the cannabinoid inside and the tear. So that's something that I cannot explain. I've been looking for an answer.
Whoa.
It really bothers me because it's weird. You can still do good stuff with that because you have the cannabinoid. It's good for topical, it's good for edible, but for hash, for extract, you need the guy to wait that 3-day windows. And the way I collect is defined by the structure of the gland. The gland is made like a fruit. It's attached to the stalk by an abscission. That abscission becomes smaller and smaller and smaller the riper the gland is, and when it's ripe, it just falls. Okay? So now I'm not looking at a plant and stuff that I cannot even see. I'm looking at a fruit tree. How do I get the ripest fruit on a fruit tree? If I don't go and smell the fruit, well, it's super simple. I shake just a tiny bit, and I have my ripest fruit that fall. And then I shake a tiny bit stronger and stronger and stronger. And every time pairing crémate, until there is no bloody fruit on my tree. And every one of my shake, it's a dimension of ripeness that englobe, doesn't matter the color, doesn't matter the size, that gland was attached by that much to the stalk to fall with that much force.
Whoa. Okay. That's really fascinating. So that's how you tell when something's ready to harvest or ready to be.
No, I cannot tell you how to harvest because you cannot look at trichome gland that are not part of the main metabolism to judge the flower, the top of the flowering cycle that is totally the main metabolism.
Okay.
The trichome gland has just a protection. It's just made to protect the plant and to capture pollen. That's it. Nothing to do with the flower. If you grow flower, look at your flower. If you grow tomato, you look at your tomato. You don't look at the trichome, and they're beautiful also on the tomato plant. Huh? You know, anything you grow, you look at what you're growing. People, when they grow cannabis, they tell you they're growing flower because you cannot grow terre. You know what I mean?
Very good point. And that goes in line with what we say as well. Right. But still, that surprises me. You do something that we actually recommend harvesting with flower. Correct me if I'm wrong. You make sure you harvest these resin glands at a kind of wide variety. So like you're saying, you're getting a vast expression of ripeness. Is that right?
It's like you never have, especially on big plant, because I work a lot with outdoor, even if we work by tier, you have a difference from one side that take more sun than the other.
For sure, okay? Yeah, good point.
So, and the size doesn't define how much resin is formed inside. The harvesting time does.
Okay.
So it's like two things that you can know by the size or the color of the trichome gland if there is resin inside or if your flower is ripe. No, it doesn't make sense. If you look at the botany of the plant, it doesn't make sense. It's not the same metabolism. The resin is a secondary metabolite. Okay, I mean, it's pretty explicit.
Man, really.
But the industry is so into the color that you forget about the science to make, because people make things up and people don't check, basically. You know what I mean? It's and you make the mistake of using water and call it an extraction. It's not an extraction. I'm still sieving. You know what I mean? It's the only evolution in a game that is 10,000 years old. And just because people call it extraction, you totally miss the point.
Sure.
You know what I mean? It's like, that's what I teach. The science behind it's the science of it. All my life, I didn't know what was a trichome gland. I'd never seen a trichome gland. I was super bomb with the tool. I could even stick it in my hand. I didn't know the product I work with. I'm a craftsman. There is two things in my life, the product and the tool. And the product defines the tool. So it's like, dude, I was good, but I was totally ignorant of the most important things in my life.
Whoa, man.
So then it's like, so what the fuck is a trichome? And then I learned stuff about trichome. It's like, whoa. So why cannabis trichome are different? It's like, oh, wow, cannabinoid. So what are cannabinoid? And how they form each other. And now I can manipulate. I can make pure CBDH. I can transform THC into CBN. I can transform my THCA into THC. I can do stuff. I can transform terp. It's when you know the science behind, then you can control stuff to a certain level, because I use only water and a little heat to be able to manipulate, but already you can do a lot of shit when you know your temperature and stuff.
It's like alchemy. I love it.
A bit at a small level. But then the alchemy is when you extract. Then you go into like hardcore, dude. It's crazy what they do.
What do you think? What do you think about the US scene? What do you think about all of these solvent extracts and all of this? Do you turn your nose up at it?
No.
We need
I have
more.
a lot of respect for it. I come from the perfume industry, dude. I knew what a BHO could do to the industry before you did, because nobody went to France and learn with the master extractor of terpene. It's like that's what we do in south of France.
Right.
We bloody extract. It's
No
like,
shit. Same thing for perfume.
Hey,
You nailed it, dude.
you know what I mean? It's like they're masters. So I knew the potential of it. And you learn really fast. And it's like when I compare to the alcohol beverage industry, hashish is like wine. I crush the matrix that created the resin together into a mass. And it has a chemical reaction, it transforms into hashish. Grape, you crush the whole grape to have a chemical reaction that transforms it into wine. If you take the juice from the matrix, if you leave what created the juice and the sugar behind, it's not like the juice of the apple is not the apple anymore. You cannot make wine anymore, but you can create many, many, many different alcohol up to pure ethanol. And every one of those alcohol can be super amazing. So it's like, even instead of bitching and promoting your own tech and process that you use over the other, it's like, do you compare whiskey and cognac? Do you compare wine and tequila? You know what I mean? It's like, what the fuck? Can't we appreciate, excuse my French, we appreciate the diversity of resin and the craft that goes behind instead of I'm the best, my tech is the best? No, it's like, it doesn't mean nothing. It's like, embrace diversity. It's like, that's the beauty of it. And they all have value and all different, psychoactive and medicinal. So it's like, no, I have a lot of respect for all those crafts.
That really means a lot coming from you. I hope you understand how much that means, because you're right. Unfortunately, the cannabis industry, and a lot of it has to do, I think, with social media and stuff, is a lot of like posturing, right? It's a lot of like, my rosin is the best. And it's like, what does that even really mean? You know what I mean?
Because as an extractor, you're still as good as your genetic and your farmer.
That's true.
And
too.
the place where it's grown and how it's being grown. It's like all of us, we're nobody without a farmer. And how many people are putting the name of their farm, the name of their farmer? How many of us are promoting the place where our stuff coming from? No, you just you buy the stuff, you put your name, it's yours. I'm sorry, where I come from, the value of quality, it's the origin of it. It's like, that's why I'm so in love with the Emerald Triangle, because it's the quality they offer, the diversity they offer, the dedication there is behind. It's like, it's unreal. Sure, my stuff is unreal. It's like, even if I do purple punch like everybody else, well, when I get the purple punch from certain farm, dude, I could smoke that all day long, and I don't like purple punch flower. And the hash is okay in general. I kind of like it, but that one was like funky with hazelnut ice cream background. It's like, yo, I smoke that. It's like, it's a place where it's grown. It's what the soil. That's what really makes the quality. Us, yeah, we can have that winemaker, distillation master. Only there is a part of us inside, but we didn't make that quality. That quality is given to us. And we should give credit to whoever gives us that quality and have the world know about it. They do it for chocolate, they do it for coffee, they do it for everything, but we don't do it for cannabis. It's like, fuck it. I hate that.
Yeah, man. And we have people in the chat saying that they're trying to promote more tweeting out about farms instead of just brand names. And I think it helps when farms actually take it upon themselves to like make an Instagram account and put themselves forward. And not everybody wants to do that, but unfortunately that's kind of how you survive in today's crazy
Even if you, as a farm, even if you don't want to brand yourself, you want to be known for the point of origin. And it's branding, dude. You know what I mean? You want you're growing fire. You want people to fucking know that you're growing fire. Okay, it's branding. So when you sell your fire, well, you want that dude that can make something out of your fire, give you credit because you give him the quality. It's very simple.
Yes, I absolutely agree. What strains in Humboldt are you really excited about working with right now? Or like just in general? Like I know you mentioned some of Subcool's strains you were a big fan of, but anything on the menu right now that you're excited about?
I was a big fan. I'm still a big fan with TGA stuff, but I have not touched for a long time. TGA, there is a lot of fucking resin. People are bitching about the flower, but the resin those plants deliver is like, wow. No, last year was blueberry muffin.
Oh, blueberry muffin from Humboldt Seed Co. Yeah, we just had Nat on.
That was one of my favorites very much last year. No, otherwise the stuff I want, it's not what people buy. I want the old stuff from up there. I don't want to make the same ash than other people. It's like, yeah, my purple punch is different because my farmer is that good. But if that farmer was growing something that nobody else has, you know what I mean, that is local, well, the value of my ash is totally different. Yeah. But to be able to do this, I need to be able to give a structure where most dispensary I work with, there is a deal between us. You cannot buy the ash if you don't buy the flower. I need you to support my farmer if you want my ash next year.
Wow,
it's cool, very simple. But it's difficult for me to be able to package the flower, to have that entity that give me the ability to package the flower of the farmer branded for the farm, to make pre-roll with the name of the farm and my name, and where the farm comes first, then the ash where my name comes first, and then the name of the farm. And you cannot buy one, you buy the three, always. As long as I don't have that infrastructure that gives me that power, I cannot promote the genetic that I want. And they cannot really put it on the market if there is nobody really promoting it, or if there is not the name of a brand behind. You know what I mean? So it's a little catch-22 for the moment. They grow stuff that they know they can move.
That's incredible, man. That's some great farmer support. And you're talking to a whole bunch of growers watching this show. So I don't know. You're just a shining example of a good figure in the cannabis industry.
Dude, even if I didn't love my people up north, like they're my tribe, the tribe I had a tribe when I traveled. They were nomadic people. And then I lost that tribe for 20 years. I was a dad. And I live with straight people, and nobody knew I was smoking. And then I went to the Emerald Triangle at the Emerald Cup, and dude, I was crying the fucking whole weekend because I was with the people. Like it's my tribe, but sedentary.
You told me that last time, man. I felt that same thing when I went out there. That's so great. That's really cool, man. Can't get enough of it. Here we are. We're coming up on an hour here. Did you do you have 2 hours for us, Frenchie? I think that was what we had planned on.
Yeah. Don't worry.
Okay, just want to double check there. Very generous of you. So let's take a little. Maybe we'll take a little.
It's nice to be able not to think.
Man. Talk. We'll just stay in the Zoom room. We'll keep our mind limited to the Zoom room here. Let's take a little halftime break. Shout out to Rhizo Rich, our very own Rhizo Rich, who we love. Actually, package headed your way, Frenchie, with some Purity coffee in it. Are you a coffee fan?
I do drink, I'm French, hello. It's like, if I could have a drip, I would.
Oh, I'm excited for you to get this Purity coffee, man. You got to let me know how it's going. But yeah, shout out to Rich. Thank you, buddy. I appreciate that. And Purity coffee on the way. So let me just rip this here bong. Someone was asking about ripeness. I think we covered that one. Hopefully, Austin, Ron, you were satisfied with that answer there. Thanks to GrowPass and Frenchie for this chat. Thank you for attending, Tao. Appreciate you, buddy. Let's all spark up here together for the halftime. What are you smoking?
Some Cherry West, 2 years old, ash in my 3-hole pipe. You don't really have a good life.
Oh my God. Incredible,
so
man.
With a wand. Where is
Oh, it's like a heated. Oh my God, that's cool, dude. You're just tapping it. Hash pipe. That's so dope, man. That's like, that's baller. Someone says exactly. Nice. So, I've had some good bubble hash in my day, but I don't think it was made with your same method. I don't think it didn't look the same as that high quality. You called it, what did you call it? Grade 1, grade A shit?
No, I call that creme. The grade for me, it's weak. The way we have to grade quality based on melt is so weak. It's valid when in producing country when I was 20 years old, because quality is defined by the cleanliness of your resin. May it be dry sieve or hand roll. The harder you roll, the more contaminant plant contaminant you're gonna stick. The harder you shake, the more contaminant you create because you work with a brittle material. And your quality is totally defined by cleanliness. The ripeness of the resin is a given. I never thought about it. I never experienced anything but totally ripe because it's Landrace. I mean, they've been doing that for hundreds of generations. They know when to plant and they know when to harvest. So it's like, all my life, it has always been defined by cleanliness. Then water came into play. So water gives you the ability to rehydrate brittle material so that if you work well, you cannot create contaminant, plant matter contaminant. If you create plant matter contaminant, it's because you made a mistake. The second thing that you have to understand with ice water sieving, it's an evolution in a game that is 10,000 of years old. And sieving is made of 2 processes in one methodology. You have your tool. The wider, the bigger your tool, the sieve made of perforation is, and the smaller, the thinner the layer of the plant over, the better your agitation and your separation. If you have a big pile over a little material, 120 micron gland to go through a 190 micron perforation, it needs to fall flat on it, bump a little bit and roll through it. If you have a pile, there is a lot that's going to stay in the middle. Sure. So you need big space, a thin layer. And so you agitate, you create a vibration to agitate, to break the gland from the stock, but at the same time, you separate through the perforation of your tool. It's 2 processes in one methodology. You cannot separate. With water, you can. That's why I could create a 50-gallon monster agitation chamber with a bomb-ass vortex. And then I use my bag to separate. That means that now I have 2 processes separated that I can fine-tune. It's like, when you reach that level of cleanliness, then I discover the level of ripeness. Then it's like I needed to know, how do I figure out what is the ripest? And I didn't know until I find that scientific paper on the abscission. When I did the abscission, it was like fucking click. I thought, oh, you have no fucking idea. But the worst of it It's something that I did all my fucking life.
Right.
I always shake hard. I mean, it's what you do when you sieve.
Right.
You shake harder and harder and harder. But for me, it was only an handicap that was creating contaminant. It was not something that gave me the territory where every one of the shake is actually pure clean and that very dimension of ripeness. So if I do, like if I do increment of 50 RPM, I have really a small shake. I have like small dimension of ripeness.
Wow.
But if I do 200, instead of shaking my tree 12 times, if I want to shake it 8 times or 4 times, I just double number. You know what I mean? And instead of having 4 dimensions of ripeness separated, I can have 4 of them together.
Fascinating stuff, man. Fascinating.
It
That was obviously a huge breakthrough. Someone was also asking, has anything changed? Maybe not a massive breakthrough like that, incorporating water, but has anything changed in your method since you shot the workshop videos on YouTube?
No.
You just still, that's the way, man.
Manipulation, it's like cleaning material before I wash. If the material is dirty or if I do a trim bin, so sometimes you ask to do trim bin, your, let's say outdoor first, super dusty place.
Yeah.
Okay? You rehydrate your plant and you empty your machine.
Yeah.
The dust is heavy. When you put the water, it's going to have a tendency to fall.
Okay.
If you do that once or twice, it's like giving a bath to the plant before you spin.
That's crazy, man. A lot of people wash their buds, and for a while it was like, especially indoor growers don't understand it. But it sounds like you have a little bit of a bud washing process there to eliminate the contaminants, especially because the outdoor growers, like you said, stuff gets all up in there, dust and dirt and all sorts of stuff. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, if there is, you know, it's like on top of it, most of the time I know the harvest, I harvest with the people, I'm pretty close to everything. When it's dusty and crazy, well, I know it's coming like that. So you take a step. When you do trim bin, it's the same. There is a lot of super small contaminants that are smaller. It is all green. So you rehydrate and you empty your machine. You don't even keep nothing. It's just, and you do that 2 or 3 times.
Wow.
Until the green become lighter. And then sometimes I turn the machine maybe 2 seconds, I empty. 5 seconds, I empty. And I have like 3, 4, 5, 6 steps of cleaning before I go and run and I can get a clean resin. But I can get there. If you play around with pre-cleaning, you reach a stage where you finally get resin with no plant contaminant.
Sounds delicious. We got someone asking, do you feel that people are too hung up on color? Someone's asking about hash makers who like the light color and harvest early for looks and what your thoughts are.
Yeah, it's not the color of the resin gland that will tell you how much resin is formed inside. And if I grow a plant, same genetic, full sun, or in a shade, or in a greenhouse, or indoor, they're all going to have a different color of resin. But if you harvest them at the right time, they will all be full of resin. I have never checked. It will be interesting to see the difference of terpene and cannabinoid, but there can't be that very much. Mostly on terpene, I would say more than cannabinoid. And the color does not define. For me, quality is how much resin is formed inside the resin gland, the melt. But above that, it's flavor and aroma. How does it smell? How does it take your mouth? How long it stays in your mouth? How smooth it is? How intense it is? You know what I mean? It's like drinking wine, like eating some food that, you know what I mean? It's like, it's all gustative. It's all our senses. But we never use that to define quality. And for me, it's a big deal, even if I don't have the melt, but I have all this flavor and stuff. And it's a wow, I've never tasted that. I don't care for the melt as much as I care for that, because I have had melty stuff, like super melty, that tasted like hay.
No. Interesting. We had a good question about monocropping. Can you elaborate on that, listener? I don't know if you're talking about polycropping, and then are you talking about mixing the hash, or are you just talking about from the grower side? If you could just maybe elaborate on that polycropping question, we can get that one in. But since you're on the subject of stickiness and resinous, we kind of touched on this, I believe, on our interview, but I wanted to bring it up here as well. I even remember you in your sieving video talking about the perfect level of stickiness. What do you think that is? And also, what happens when you run some of these strains, like some ones I've had recently that are very, very enjoyable to smoke the flowers, but they're more greasy than sticky. They're kind of oily and slick, and they don't have that stickiness. What are your thoughts?
I don't touch those. It's the stickiness is defined by the ratio of monoterpene and sesquiterpene in a resin gland.
Oh, wow.
And that's defined by the plant and the plant habitat, more even than the genetic.
Wow.
Everything that are the secondary metabolism is totally controlled by the plant. Dude, that stuff is totally toxic and bad for the plant. But it controls everything. It even controls how much can ooze outside the resin gland. It's like, it's insane, the power there is behind that, of the control of the plant kingdom. It's like, wow.
It's like a superpower of the plant, man.
It's what the plant used to control every living organism that is mobile and not mobile.
Borderline magic.
There is even trichome on the roots. The root hair are actually trichome.
Wow.
It's intense, and it's like 200, the plant kingdom has 200,000 compounds. Organic compound, from the most deadly to the most beneficial and everything in between. We don't even know what it could do with it. And the plant kingdom has 500 million years of evolution on us. It's like the fact that we can feel and create dope, like opiate and shit, it's because 300 million years ago, the plant kingdom went at war with the insect kingdom. And the insect kingdom created antibodies to be able to deal with the stuff the plant kingdom was creating. Well, that's what we have in our body today. That's what we can feel opiate and create our own and stuff.
Right.
You
That's
know
exactly
what I mean?
right,
it's that powerful.
Yeah. I even just read an article. We'll get right back to Hash here attendees, but I even just read an article saying that the compounds that make spicy plants spicy, and the compounds that make bitter plants bitter, and all of these kind of micro poisons is kind of how they were putting them, is what built our immune system over the evolution of humankind, and how those are the things that like stressed us into creating an immune system.
Not humankind. For 300 million years, we were not yet here with the insect.
Right.
Like our nervous system, everything it's like it goes deep and far. In time.
Plants are running the show. You're right. Secretly, plants are running the show. That's like the big. That's exactly right, man. Trichome head size. This is something I'm experiencing in real time with my recent harvest.
Mm-hmm.
I for the first time hooked up you've inspired me, Frenchie. I'm getting my trichome science on. I've hooked up my DynoLite USB, so now I can really explore. And I've noticed a massive difference in trichome size, trichome color, and then trichome shape. But why don't we start with size? Is there too big of a resin head? Is there too small of a resin head for your type of process?
The size of the gland is defined by the cultivar,
right,
and the habitat. So when you have tropical plants, like in the Himalaya, in South Africa, in South America, or Southeast Asia, the plant creates The plant live in an environment that is super humid, super rich, a lot of insects. They branch like crazy and they do narrow leaf. And the trichome gland are small, close, and they ooze resin because there is a lot of insect life to deal with it.
Wow.
When you go into a desertic, mountainous place like the Hindu Kush, that basically kiss the Himalaya, you have altitude also, but you have very little insect life, almost no green, very desertic, super dusty, super windy. The plant grows small because there is too much wind, because they cannot go big and branch, they make fat leaves. They adapt to the environment. But the resin gland, they cannot really be sticky anymore, because if they're sticky, all the dust covers them, and all the UV business that the plant does for the plant is not working anymore. So the plant creates bigger gland, less of them, with a thicker membrane. The plant can control everything. And it's called, there is two ways to change your DNA. There is epigenetic memory. The next generation is going to be stronger because you struggle with such whatever climatic or geographic condition. And there is, comment on appelle ça? Phenotypic plasticity. That's every living organism, not only the plant, create their own phenotype in this life that leave a trace in their own DNA.
Mm-hmm.
And that creates the transformation that the plant become part of the habitat, because it's fucking survival, and they got the tool and they use it, basically. So it's like the size is meaningless. You cannot judge nothing by the size, except the size, the smaller size, the size of your tool, basically. You know what I mean? And the color also is meaningless. The only thing that you need to know is how much resin is inside. Really, really what you want to know, and the density of it. It's really important also.
Is there a way to tell by the naked eye, or just when you start making it with your process you find out?
Yeah, it's like the problem with ash. You won't know how much resin is formed inside until you collect it and crush the membrane to see how much resin is inside.
Man,
it's painful. Or you would need a type of infrared light that gives you the ability to look inside the gland.
Ooh, that's interesting, man. Let's get on it, Dino Light. Let's go. Get some infrared in there.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, that's what kills me. It's like you have science people who are creating goggle vision to judge by the color the ripeness of a room, so that you don't even check the botany of the plant before you go into doing stuff like that. Like that's pretty techy. It's like a tool like that adapted with an infrared so that you could look inside. Otherwise, you would need to be able to look at the abscission.
Right. Wow.
But man, you have to look at a close-up, like.
Right. Frenchie, I'm sold on your process. I'm sold on trying this myself, my next run. Is your process, please correct me if I'm wrong, is your process a little bit more of an art than a science? There's a few times in your videos where you say, the first time you feel this, you're going to know what I'm talking about.
But it's not it's a feel. It's a body touch doing it, nothing else. It's simple, dude.
So I should be confident.
Simple. Yeah. Oh, yeah. If you understand, read the article, the 3 articles, read the science behind. Mm-hmm. You get it all. It's like, if you read the definition of the word sieving, already it gives you the logic
Hmm.
and the parameter of the actual methodologies that you're
Sure.
working with. You know, the should do and absolutely not do.
Yeah, right.
Okay? It's in that definition. If
Mhm.
you use the wrong word to define the process that you're using already, dude, you don't really know what you're doing.
Yeah, that's true.
Technically speaking, you can make it happen, don't get me wrong.
Right.
But there is no way you can maximize the process because
You don't
you
understand it.
apply the wrong definition to the wrong road to it.
Right. Totally. That's absolutely right. And your videos are they're very clear and easy to understand, but just certain things like the amount of pressure and things like that, I'm a little bit hesitant, and I'm a little bit worried that my first time I'm gonna, not come out with something incredible, but I'm giving it a try, man, because I love your process and it's going down. That is absolutely going down this harvest. So my dry tent is right over there. What about making it fresh? You're always rehydrating buds. Is there a reason it gets dried, cured, and rehydrated? To kind of
Because I mean, dried and cured, you want to rehydrate to not have contaminant.
Okay.
Okay. Otherwise, because of the water, I can do live plant. That means that I bring my machine in the field and I do it at night, full moon. Actually, it's better to harvest at night because you don't smell. There is no terpene expression of the plant. It doesn't use the terpene at night. So it's a good time to harvest anyway. In the mountain, it's cold. And but when you do live, you're limited to strain and farm. There is not that much you can do in a season.
Interesting.
And for a long time, I was against freezing. Because when you freeze a plant that is made of 80% of water, and the water becomes 10% bigger when it becomes ice, you literally explode from the inside out at the molecular level, the totality of the plant.
Mm.
But when the plant is live, it's like a cut that bleeds. The whole chlorophyll system is a plant, it's like in a vein-like system. So when you do live resin, the first wash, you have a little bit of bleeding. It's easy to wash. But every time you wash, you have a little bit more. But you can wash it. But still, it's time and a lot of water. When you freeze, you cauterize the plant. You cauterize the scar.
Right.
It doesn't fucking bleed.
Right.
It bleeds only when the inside melts. And then it bleeds bad and you cannot separate.
Fuck yeah.
So if you don't work in good condition, as I had experienced the first time, after 2 or 3 wash, I bleed. Me, I wash my plant 8 to 12. You know what I mean? That was sucks. But in the mountain with my double chamber monster stainless steel, dude, I could do it like 8 washes, the stuff was like perfect.
Oh,
so I had to apologize to everybody, and it gives you the ability to do live resin, like if you were in India, basically, frozen, so you have like that live resin all year long, and dried and cured. And you want cured, because if it's not cured, you still have the green. If it's just dry, dude, I have that chlorophyll. That chlorophyll, it's going to bleed in my water, and I cannot get rid of it. You need to wait 3 months so that chlorophyll becomes sugar. Then my water would be gold.
You're so
you know
cool,
what I mean?
I'm just going to say it. Dude, you got chlorophyll in my water. This is really fun.
Yeah, it's bad, man. Chlorophyll in the water, it's bad.
We got a question, pertinent question, great question. Any differences? Do you treat do you treat high CBD flowers any different than high THC when you're making hash? None at all.
No.
So can you make basically the same looking product, the same consistency product, or is it different?
I made a 52% CBD hash in Switzerland with 1.9 THC, 0.5 Delta 8, 2.5 CBC, that was like a caramello, yeah, crazy beautiful. And that 1.9 THC, I can make it CBN.
Oh, whoa.
All
Interesting.
day long. I can make pure CBD hash all day long.
That's incredible. So you
If
can
you
get
give me
by
a
any
ICBD,
regulations or anything.
You
So
give me ICBC hash, I can make you ICBC plant. Any plant you give me, I can make that hash, depending on your ratio of cannabinoid.
the same method, nothing really changes.
It's the same.
Wow.
Just the knowledge of the cannabinoid, the way they form each other, help me to not make hash only, make hash depending on the cannabinoid. It's, yeah, knowing the science brought me to
That's so
another
cool, man.
dimension of together. It's much more fun.
I would love to try
Became
some of that
huge.
CBD. That CBD's
It-
hash sounds fucking
So
awesome.
CBD hash is like, don't think that CBD is not psychoactive. CBD is psychoactive. CBD locked down to the receptor, so it's psychoactive. It's not the same, and it's quite the opposite as THC, but still, it's like smoking high CBD hash, especially in the morning, an old man, when you feel the pain, dude. It's like a shower. It's like you can feel it
Oh my God.
disappear from your body, and it's like your body is so fucking relaxed that you're buzzed. I mean, your
That's
head, it goes together. It's all, there is no separation of well-beingness when your body is that relaxed without any pain or kinkiness or anything. It's just like,
Fuck.
then the head goes, oh.
It's a whole nother level, man. I love
And
that.
imagine everything in between, from 28 to pure to one-on-one. There is a whole amazing territory to discover. It's crazy.
Yeah, man. Absolutely. What are your thoughts on rosin? A lot of people are taking bubble hash or what have you and pressing it with heat and squishing it. What do you think of this?
It's an extract. It's the juice of the apple. It's not the same than the apple.
Sure.
So to give you a difference, because I smoke both, and I kind of like rosin, but in the afternoon, 4 o'clock. When you smoke hash, it's like a warm blanket, super comfortable in front of a fireplace, a long ride. Like that cozy, warm feeling.
Hell yeah.
Oh, that little bubble. When you take that hash and you squish it, it bongs you. It's super speedy and it's short.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's not the fucking same at all. And I wouldn't smoke rosin all day long, but I do like rosin when in the afternoon, instead of going for more coffee, well, I have 2-3 dabs of rosin. Dang, dang. It brings me back to that level where I last the rest of the day. So it's like you don't compare. It's so amazingly different that
Sure.
you just can't compare. It's just a need of appreciation of diversity, like we talked at the beginning, more than anything else. There is not
Sure.
one better than the other.
I
It's
agree.
just so diverse and beautiful.
Interestingly, though, I think it's kind of bringing back bubble hash a little bit because people aren't squishing flowers because I guess it's not as, I don't know, it doesn't yield as much. It's just not as good. So people are it's bringing your style kind of back to the forefront in a different way, maybe?
What bring back hash? It's BHO. BHO is bringing everything, and it's still leading. There is every new product, every stuff new that is it's BHO.
Yeah.
They run the show. Everything else, it's copy. Even the hash. It's like when Matt Rice and Nicati started their solventless ice wax. It's
Ice wax. Oh no! What's ice wax? What is this word?
The products that look like an extract, that has almost as much cannabinoid, usually more terp, that leave little residue on the nail. It was a fit on the door, and that's what brought back the hash. It's BHO. It's what BHO put on the table that is creating the market of tomorrow. Everybody else is following. Everybody else that is into extract.
Everybody needs to go and watch Frenchie's videos, all of them. This is what's up. This is the man right here. He's the real deal. So I'm trying to bring back. I'm doing it myself, and I'll see how it goes. And I'm trying to bring back this because I have nothing better than it.
But it's like you make a big deal of me, but it's like I didn't invent anything. Everything is based on traditional sieving.
Yes.
Because of my knowledge of dry sieving, when I touch water, I could see it as an evolution. I could see that separation. I could bring the game of collecting gland further, but my end product is still traditional hash. I don't call it traditional hash and I call it ice water hash to clarify a little bit. But it's a traditional hash at the end of the day. It doesn't matter the tech you use to collect the gland. It's an end product. It's definitely hashish. It's resin gland pressed into a mass with the source of it. You know what I mean? It's just that technology gives me the power to do better.
Mm-hmm. I want to make sure that we have some new questions here, and I want to make sure we get them answered. Do you ever go to dispensaries, someone's asking, and how do you select hash from a dispensary if you do?
I don't, because I cannot see, I cannot touch, and I cannot smell.
That's a great answer.
So if I do, or when I did, it's because I know the dude. And most of the time, it's people I know personally, and I see them when we had event and stuff. It's we always share and stuff like that. When I'm a judge at the event, I'm lucky enough to have like an amazing choice of amazing products. But no, I don't buy much at dispensary. No.
Okay. Someone else is. I'm going to give this monocropping question a shot. I think they're asking about you blending different strains together into one hash. They're asking, instead of the monocropping mindset and the focus on individual cultivars, is there any interest in blending and polyculture for efficacy?
So you could. It's like making cocktail. You know what I mean? You use different flavor to create new flavor, and I get it, but you have to understand, I'm a 63 years old man who all his life for 20 years had 6 flavors. Morocco, Lebanese, Middle East like Turkey, rarely Iran, but it tastes a little bit the same, Pakistani, Afghani, India, Nepal. That was it in our life. I had experienced a tiny bit diversity in India in the field, really, where you have the diversity of terpene profile in the plant, but at the end of the day, you have a cocktail of fruit. You don't have only banana or mango. You know what I mean? And then I come to California, and it's like sour. You have the gas, you have the fruit that you bite in the fruit. It's like, for me, it's more a discovery and an amazement of the diversities that I experience than mixing. I would easily mix ITHC and ICBD, though, on the other hand, to get to something. Or I would look to mix specific terpene for a specific need, or but I wouldn't mix just for mixing. No, it's like I'm so flabbergasted, like impressed and by the diversity that is offered to me, that I just need to enjoy it as much as I can. But I would, for people that other generation, my little Californian friends, they were born in diversity. That's their heritage. So they play around like crazy with taste and stuff. I have a friend who does that with extract, but he's a wine connoisseur. He has a wine connoisseur palate. Dude, he can create stuff that are incredible that nobody has on the market because he just created it. So if you have the palette, not only through spinning plant to make ash, but like if you have extract, you're an extractor and you want to go to a higher range of level, you need to find somebody that can appreciate the different level of terpene and help you get to something that is unique, that you'll be the only one to put on the market. And yeah, that's your future, guys. Like, I'm an old school that is trying to enjoy as much as I can, but I'm not the future. You are the future. It's like you make a big deal of me. You should think how important you are, because right now, everything changing. It's like, you are the shit. I'm just the guy who give you the tool to make it happen, basically. You know what I mean? To a certain level.
Very, very humble.
I'm handing down my
Yes.
craft and my knowledge to the next generation so that you can be better than me. That's the name of the game.
Totally inspirational, man. I agree with you 100%. You can, it looks like you want to rip that pipe. Let's do another quick smoke break right here if you'd like. But you're so right. I want to tell a quick story if you want to hit your pipe. I was down in Colombia with the coffee team, and there were some coffee tasters, some real cuppers. Man, it's like a whole nother level. Like, I don't even know how to, it's like someone not knowing how to drive a car that they own. Like, I don't even know how to use my taste buds correctly. These guys were gals were on a whole nother level. So I liked what you said about kind of the palate is no joke. If you have someone who really understands flavors and like can correctly identify them, pinpoint them, and understand how they interplay, like, yeah, that's a really good point.
You need to train yourself. You need to study how it's all connected to the brain, and it's fucking weird the way it all happened.
Yeah.
It's chemical compound. This stuff is weird.
Yeah.
And then you need to train yourself to recognize terpene profile. It's like everything else. You need to teach yourself. Like color, it's like learning color, learning everything. It's like you need to smell the difference between sugar, white, black sugar, brown sugar, caramel, burnt caramel. You know what I mean? You need to be able to smell them, to be able to define them.
100%.
And not just categorize into sweet.
Exactly. Totally. And that was me at the coffee tasting table. I was like, oh, this one tastes great. Like, really descriptive. It tastes great.
I know I've been to one coffee tasting also. It was pretty amazing. Chocolate also. It's a level of texture in the mouth and stuff. It's like, wow.
Oh, you would have loved it on these regenerative agriculture coffee farms in Colombia, and how, yeah, some had these orange notes and others were bitter and others were extremely sweet or nutty. And these guys were doing a large scale coffee farm, all regenerative organic. I know that's really big in Humboldt County. Do you place a lot of emphasis on farming style, or do you just?
I work only with regenerative farmer.
Doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. That's it.
That's it.
I'm lucky enough to be. I'm lucky enough, and I'm small enough to be able to snub everybody else. But like for whatever I put on the market, it's from the Emerald Triangle. It's regenerative farmer from small farmer. That's what I do. Not that I wouldn't spin some indoor from a crazy grower for my stash and his stash. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But I'm commercially, let's say, I'm stuck into terroir, appellation, regenerative farming and stuff like that, because if we don't do that, then we don't have a future on the planet.
You're speaking my language, man. And we get into that deep on the coffee show too. We like to cover it all on Growcast because I am an organic farmer, and people will hear me say on the show that I believe that's the best way to grow cannabis. I'm just going to say it, but like we do like to cover all styles, and I like to help growers along on their journey. But I can't imagine, again, I don't mean to be blowing smoke here. I can't imagine like a real connoisseur like yourself going for the synthetics and the stuff like that. This regenerative organic, it's just a better end product in my opinion. More balanced, more flavorful, more natural. I don't know. No brainer to me, let alone all of the ecological benefits like you're saying.
It's it all depends how it's grown indoor. It all depends on the nutrients, but you're gonna miss on the light for sure, and you're gonna miss on the climatic elements. You're gonna miss on the microbial elements. You're gonna miss on many elements that create a lot into what the plant is at the end. And you have to understand that those trichome glands are what the plant is. It's like the expression of the plant dealing with the outside world. It's a bibliography of the plant life, literally. It's a book. Oh. You can read the lives there. It's how that plant has dealt with the environment. Wow. And it's the richer the environment and the wilder, the more power there is in that gland.
Man, I love it. Oh man, I feel like we could do this all day. We're coming up to it already here, so let's make sure that we answer all the questions. I appreciate you so much, Frenchie. I know I keep saying it. Did I say Frankie? I said Frenchie. What does Frenchie think of THCA? Somebody's asking. I've come across some that is pure white, but the effects are completely different from hash of other extracts. THCA.
So THCA, it's pure medicinal. There is no psychoactive effect to it whatsoever. You do feel THCA because you transform it into THC. So you have certain psychoactive compounds. But because those compounds are without any terpene, it doesn't have the power of it. And because it's without any other cannabinoid, it's, I don't know, I find it really weird, the weirdest experience. It's like, the buzz is like tingly, like creepy tingly, and you're trying to have a taste in your mouth because you just smoke. I mean, and there's nothing. And it's so unsettling that I like THC. If I had to use THCA as a medicine, I would swallow it, or I would use it as a sublingual.
Sure.
Because it's a medicine. Like THCA is more anti-inflammatory than CBD. Not more than CBDA, but much more than CBD. It's like THCA is another ball game altogether. That's the medicinal aspect of the plant. I don't deal with that. Except if you want it personally, you ask for it, I can make it happen. But it's not so. Me, I decarb, I press at 180 Fahrenheit for 20 minutes to be sure that I get as much out as possible.
Man, that's absolutely killer. Lots of people in chat just saying that they love your method. Someone watched your kind of condensed hash making video, and they said that they've copied exactly what you did, and they said their hash was incredible. Another person says they've seen all your videos and had a few friends take your class, having tried their stuff out here, having tried your method out here, that he's really happy with the quality that he can make from his own homegrown. So lots of love in the chat for you, Frenchie. Question been sitting here for a while. What is your favorite infusion/consumption, food and drink? I don't know if he's asking for like infusion edibles or even just pairings.
If you check my IG video, my favorite is a Gizos. It's something I've been making since I was 17 years old. You let the hash macerate in cognac or rum overnight.
Wow.
And then you prepare a strong coffee. You add the booze and the hash to it, a dollop of heavy cream, and sugar and a little espresso shot of that. That's my favorite. 20 minutes. We wouldn't go to see a movie without a Guizos.
Whoa.
So when we were in full quarantine, I was showing I thought about it and I was showing it to people. And then I prepare a bong, like old style bong with a bunch of herb and spices. And
Bong as in BHANG, the kind of traditional Indian cannabis drink?
Traditional Indian,
yeah.
bong, like 1800 recipe. And the stuff was really strong and different with not that much flour. Right. So I thought, gee, I should make a Guizos bong. So instead of doing only alcohol and hash, I crush cardamom, I put vanilla, pepper, like the whole fucking ta-ta-ta. And I made the chocolate. Instead of making a coffee, I made the chocolate Guizos, man. The stuff was super yummy. And it packs the power when you play with terpene and you add like the spices, dude, it changed the buzz big time. And if you know your terp and you know your spices, you can literally make something like super speedy, more psychoactive, more relaxing. I can put you to sleep. It's like, wow.
Fuck yeah,
really
man.
Cool.
We got some chefs in the chat saying that they love that idea. The cardamom mixed in. I know.
Check out my IGTV. There is you have the recipe of a bunch of drink and edible. I've been at it big time all the quarantine.
Great, I love it. That's exactly what we need, man. Much love from Amsterdam, coming from Mila. Mila.
Oh, Mila, love you.
Yeah, love you too. Absolutely. What do we got here?
Mila is the one that gave us that only evolution in the game. She's the one who made that bag.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
There you go. Fantastic.
She didn't make the machine, but she's the one who actually separated the machine, the agitation from the sieving.
Wow. There you go.
My tech is that good because she's the one.
Nice. There you go.
Love you to death always.
Shout out to Amsterdam. Hell yeah. Let's see. When I can get good quality organic flour affordably enough. No, I'm just talking about THCA. What do we got? Any questions that I've missed here? Oh, someone's asking about your cultivation experience. You have a nice project going right now, do you not? Oh, well, I mean, you know.
It was going well.
All right. That's what I was just going to say.
I'm like a winemaker. I never grew my hash. During the 18, 20 years I travel, every year I would spend 3-4 months making my stash. And I would go and bloody smoke it on the beach. Basically, that was my life. Like I was a beach bum making his own hash. So when I came here and I came into the vineyard, I'm a winemaker. I grew a little bit at the beginning, but I cannot take care of it truly. I don't stay long enough to be able to take care of it the whole season. Because of the quarantine and COVID, then I thought, since I'm stuck here, I know for a long time, it would be really, really cool to have something in a garden. And it's been really a great experience. It's so nice.
You look happy out there, man. And I got to tell you, you put the growers on a pedestal. And I mean, listen, all credit to growers out there. I'm not trying to, belittle the farming lifestyle. But growing's, I'm a grower too, man. Growing's pretty easy. You say making hash is easy. I say growing's easy. So, I mean, I think you can probably get away with growing some pretty good dank with that brand of yours.
No, but it's like, check the basic of the principle, and then you'll see how easy it is. It's like if you don't have the basic and everybody make it complicated, then it's difficult.
That's true. Growing, same thing. You can make growing difficult by overcomplicating it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I've seen that. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Lighten up with Frenchie. This is tons of fun. Can I just take a moment to point to the audience members and say, how about this? Smoking hash with Frenchie live on stream. We made it, folks. am happy that quarantine has gotten everybody more comfortable with Zoom so that we can all kind of get together easier virtually. Very small silver lining in all of this craziness. Did I miss anything? Oh, I'm sorry. What did you want to say?
Go for it.
Did I miss anything? Rob, am I all caught up here? Someone asking about indoor cultivation. You kind of covered that. You were kind of...
I mean, I respect there is places where you don't have fucking choice. If you don't use chemical nutrients, bless you. If you use chemical nutrients, you're actually hurting the planet and you're killing yourself. If you're young, you're killing your future, literally, dude. If you use anything that is not biodegradable, you're killing your future. Doesn't matter how much money you're making right now. Doing shit stuff, you don't have a future if you don't change what you do. So, yeah, you can do it indoor. I know people who do no-till indoor, and they do great stuff. Do organic indoor, you have an edge in the market. You know what I mean? It's like you can do great stuff indoor. Indoor, you do it because you're stuck with the light or the regulation. But doesn't mean that you have to use chemical nutrient to do your shit. Because doesn't matter how much you flush, every molecule of that plant is made from a chemical. You know what I mean? Right. So at the end of the day, well, it's a chemical plant that may taste good, but it's not it. It's like you have the choice to go organic even when you're indoor. Take it because it's for the good of the planet. It's beyond you. It's beyond our little self. It's like, look at the fuck going on in California. It's like we are at the gate of hell.
Yeah, man.
You know what I mean? It's like that's the climate. It's like there is a lot of shit happening on the planet that we have to take care of, and it's cannabis that should take it. And the people who grow CBD flower and don't do nothing with their stock and their fiber, shame on you. And because before making flower, ICBD flower, is a natural resource that is supposed to save the planet. Maybe you should read Jack Herer before you plant hemp to grow CBD flower, because I'm pretty sure you feel pretty bad to do the shit you're doing. And if you're young, like I say, it's like, doesn't matter how much money you make now, you don't have a fucking future to burn it.
To burn it. There you go. Yes.
What's the bloody point? It's like make less money, but do it with consciousness so that you actually have a future.
100%. Without getting too far off track, I simultaneously have a lot of hope and then worry for this next generation, which is they do seem very concerned about things like the environment. I'm not young, I'm not the next generation, but there's more concern about the environment as well. But also the opposite is true. What you're saying, just kind of this pursuing money, this false pursuit of happiness, kind of grafted happiness, the idea of happiness that society and our parents and our teachers and our preachers and our pastors have put on us. And in reality, it comes down to caring for yourself, caring for your loved ones, caring for the planet. And that's really what's most important. And if you're a gardener, that's a big choice.
When you're a cannabis grower, you have more responsibility than anybody on the planet, okay? Because you know better. So there is no excuse. Doesn't matter. Sure. There is no excuse. And everybody is bloody growing up like we grow ITHC flower. It's like you're growing CBD flower for the CBD market. You're growing up because it's a shortcut to sell low THC plant. Well, I find it shameful if you don't do anything with the plant material. It's like we don't need, for example, hempcrete that is fireproof. Example, in California. You know what I mean? It's like there is so much. There are 23,000 products in 8 industries that we can do with hemp.
Yeah.
And you let the fiber and the stock rot in your field or just burn it. It's like, dude, Seriously.
Yeah, that's a really good
It's
point
pretty
too.
ugly if you think of it.
Yeah. It looks like we're getting darker and darker there. It's good because we're coming to the end of the stream here. Let's make sure to wrap up these few questions. Becker is asking, how important is the quality of the water and the ice? Oh, this is a really good question, man. We have some horrible tap water here where I live in the Chicagoland
So,
area.
Ice,
Yeah. What are your
ice,
thoughts?
you do not want ice. Ice is the nemesis of the system. The more ice, the more crushing power there is. Ice is to make the water ice cold because resin is sticky. If you don't want the resin to be sticky, it needs to be cold so that you can actually detach it from the plant matter without sticking and separate it through the hole of your tool. So that's why you need cold. When you dry sieve, you don't dry sieve in the summer in the sun. You do it in the winter in the shade when it's dry and cold. That's the name of the game.
Okay.
It's like it's just to deal with the characteristic.
That's it.
You want ice cold water. It's the current of the water that detach the gland.
That's a big distinction. Okay.
And
That's
the
great.
water, you need it clean. You need it neutral. Basically, you need a 7 pH so that is not too acidic.
Yeah.
Because it can damage the membrane, or the opposite, and it would leave that whitish residue on it when it dry. You have to be careful about chemical, chlorine, and that type of stuff, because it can, anything that can make the membrane that protect everything you want inside weaker is bad.
I can't imagine any contaminants would be good.
Anything that can damage that membrane, it's what protect everything for us. Sieving, you need to protect the integrity of it, and chemical can damage that integrity.
Yeah, we have the chloramines and chlorines here, and then it's also just like really hard water. Like I'm not sure the hardness would be good. So you're saying filter your water if you have to.
Yeah, you need to filter your water.
Okay, for sure.
You filter your water and you use a water chiller before using it. Or you use a big container with a bunch of ice and a pump inside, that water you use.
Right.
But you leave the ice. The ice is, you can use a tiny bit to be sure that you know that if there is a few floating, your water is still ice cold.
Right.
You know what I mean? But if you put water at 38, 39 in your machine, and you spin it 5-10 minutes in a cold environment, it's going to be ice cold at the end. You know what I mean? Still.
Okay. So it's about the coldness.
Yeah. The more ice, the more grinding power, the more plant contaminant you can create.
Okay. Super important distinction. There you go. Thanks, Becker, for that great question. We have a question about aging. Do you still age your personal stash? How important is aging for hashish?
I not because I sell my personal stash. I age 3 months minimum everything that I put to smoke.
Wow.
Everything. 2-3 months minimum.
That's much longer than I would have thought.
So you remember the wine crushing? When I crush the gland together, you have the resin with a lot of terp inside, and inside you have the membrane and everything that created the resin and stuff. And resin, the terpene are corrosive, so there is a lot of stuff happening, and it lasts a few weeks. So I'm trying always to wait until that first chemical reaction that has never been studied happen, and the resin kind of settle down into his new format, then it will be really aging. At that time, it's like kind of keeping the wine in a barrel before you bottle it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Kind of. You reach a level of stability, of goodness that is good, but you can bring it further if you want.
Frenchie, let's see, we have 7 minutes and questions are still flooding in. Like you did 2 hours and that's that's how much people want to ask you questions, man. Let's do this last one. We have time. We have 7 minutes here. I know there's a little business to take care of at the end, but someone's asking your thoughts on a little experiment they were thinking. What if you used 2 separate work bags, one with just plant material and the second one with just ice? When you need to add ice, only add it to the ice bag, so you won't be able to layer the ice and plant material, but you can ensure the ice won't crush or grind your plant materials. Any obvious reasons this wouldn't be a good idea?
How do you do the agitation?
Okay.
Yeah, you need an agitation. You need water. I would layer down like that. People were asking me if I could do ice water ash in a mountain in India where I was making charas. And I was telling them, yeah, because at the end of the valley, it's a chain of mountain with eternal snow. The water is really ice cold. You just create a little waterfall. You put your 220 bag with a plant, and you put 160 and your 45 bag under it at different levels that doesn't touch. The water falling down your bag is gonna take away everything from the plant material. That move a little bit. You just have to change what you put in your 220 and you collect in your other bag. Layering like that, the bag you could, but you need that force of water falling down to take the tricone, to break the tricone from the stock and push them through the hole of the tool.
Okay, interesting. I hope that answered your question there, Joe P. Cool. Okay, this is as good as a stopping point as we're going to get because the questions do keep rolling in. And I'm sorry, Michael, we couldn't get to your question. Maybe we'll do another one in the future. Frenchie's so generous. I don't even want to tease another one, man. Thank you so much, Frenchie. You're the man. You're like fading to black, like cinematic style. So it's like perfect time. Yeah, thank you so much, man. Thank you so much for taking the time today. I seriously appreciate you.
No, and all of you guys, you can connect with me by email or on IG. If you have questions, I'm here to teach. It's like my reward is your success. The better you get and the more I can help you, the more reward you give me, and you have no idea how rewarding it is to teach to people who fall in love with your passion. It's like I'm sharing my passion. It's a privilege, literally.
You're the man.
Much love.
Seriously, you're the man. Real quick before we sign off, shout out to @StonyGrowing on IG. You just won a pack of seeds. We're doing that giveaway right now. So Rob had me announce this on stream. Shout out to Stony Growing, and shout out to mygrowpass.com, of course, opening our doors September 23rd. Frenchie Cannoli on YouTube, FrenchieCannoli.com. Check out all the articles. The articles are incredible. Check out all the videos. And one more time, Frenchie, thank you so much, my friend. I am in your debt.
Thanks to you. Sorry for the lighting, though.
It's good. It was cool, man. It was like a natural fade out. It was a slow fade. We'll let you go, man. Have a great night. Stay safe out there, and you should reach out to me if you need anything, my friend. If you ever need to escape to the Midwest,
I really appreciate it.
You can land. Okay. Take care, Frenchie.
All the best.
See you later, man. All right. Wow, fantastic. How about that, Rob? That was great.
That was a great time. That was a great time.
It's like,
pardon me, I'm not going to put on video. It's a little late here. I'm going to be heading to bed very shortly, but
for sure.
That was a lot of fun. Great job, Jordan.
Thanks for hanging, man. I appreciate that. There was a ton of chat. So to conduct that and run chat was a struggle because you guys in chat, you did awesome. Great questions. Members, look forward to the recap during the AMA. We're gonna spend the first part of the AMA talking about this stream, or we will recap for members because that was so cool. Again, mygrowpass.com, opening our doors on the 23rd. That's all for now, Rob. That about covers it, right? That was just so killer. I'm buzzing.
Yep, sounds great. We will talk to everybody later and look out for your recap tomorrow.
Thank you so much, everybody. We'll see you next time. This is Jordan River, Frenchie Cannoli, and Rob Smith signing off, saying be safe and grow smarter.
See you guys.